How many deals have you done that other agents would have just assumed were dead deals that you were able to get to the finish line?
And there's a stat that came out within the last couple of weeks. This year, 75% of the 70,000 realtors have not done a transaction yet this year. So like when you're not doing it once in 6 months, I suspect you haven't mastered that craft. So, you've got to be proactive. You've got to, resuscitate the deal. I'm asked the question, every day, how's the market? I wish people were asking how's the realtor. We're struggling right now, and the markets are different, whether they're commercial, residential, condominium.
We're gonna do two segments essentially. The first one, I'm gonna really dig into things that we're seeing from a sentiment perspective in the marketplace, dealing with buyers, sellers, and other agents, and giving you some strategies that you can take and find success on your own. After that, I call him the surgeon of real estate. I'll give a little bit of a preamble to Michael and who he is. He is probably one of the most data-driven agents I've ever met in my life. It's like scientific, really incredible analysis on the data side, and real estate is art and math. I very much, Shannon will say, will try and run through a brick wall and spend all the money to get everything done. I'm not great at running the business side, hence why I married Shannon. But that's kind of the art side of the business, right? I think this will be a fun balance of the art and the math, where I still have to understand the math, he still has to understand the art, but I think you'll get two very different perspectives. So the structure from a market perspective that I really just wanted to take my time and dig into with you guys is very different than what you hear on the news. To a high level, some of the things you hear on the news are absolutely true in terms of the general market sentiment, where there's a lot of homes for sale on the market. Buyers don't necessarily feel a sense of urgency. Sellers are looking for advice and don't always know what to do when they're listing their property, and they can interview 10 agents and hear 10 different opinions and not really understand, well, maybe I'll just go with the cheapest option. Maybe I just price it super low. Like, how quickly can I sell this asset when it's a very unique asset? When we're thinking about the market, Mike and I have probably a different approach than 90% of people in our industry. Because when I get called to sell a house, or I get called for a buyer to look for where they want to live, it's not me showing up with paperwork and my comp's already done with paperwork for them to sign and I have the price in my head. It's usually a forensic analysis of the asset that they're selling, where they're selling it, how homes in that price point or region are trading, and what the roadmap of the clientele is. Mike, when you go through assessing a seller, how is it for you in this market, say, versus the market when it was peak?
A couple of great points, and I'll often say that we take a consultant's approach to selling real estate. I know some of you in this room, but I'd like to just get a sample of how many people are active trading realtors, licensed realtors in the room. About half, and then a bunch of investors, plus one, yeah. I got into the business 2 decades ago with a strong academic background in like engineering and commerce and economics. So we use a lot of data to help guide our clients make the decision. I think in this type of market, a realtor can't make the market. You guys do a great job with your marketing and advertising, but I believe our job has always been to help the clients navigate the market. And this is certainly a market that you can't create the market, because in some markets they don't exist. There's just no buyer activity. So using some of that data, knowing how to interpret that data as a professional, I think is vital in this type of market.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think there's always a range that a property is going to sell for, and the buyers right now, they're coming in hundreds of thousands of dollars under asking price. Sellers a lot of times just don't even want to sign it back. It's our job to kind of come back to them and say, just sign it back, even if it's full price or $5,000. Let me broker the deal, right? And I think how you equip yourself in this market with the data before you enter that conversation is very much going to dictate how you end up from a results standpoint, right? Whether you're talking about a $3 million property or an $800,000 property, the way you engage in that, you really do have to be data-driven to understand where the market is for that type of asset and be able to be confident in the advice that you're giving your client. That maybe it isn't the exact price, maybe there's no movement in that specific market. And the way you typically get there is relationships, right? It's being an actual craftsman or craftswoman at your job and spending time in community. The agents that are here talking to each other, I guarantee you're going to leave here better informed on some things that are happening in the investment and affordable housing space. You're going to hear from other agents that are doing stuff in their market as to how the market's doing and how they're adapting. And like Hedl and I, we have spent hundreds of hours in collaboration. He's seen the back end of our CRM. He's heard about all the challenges in business over the years and things I've struggled with. Like I literally will call him and be completely open because we will get better together. I think this space is a great opportunity for everybody else to do that at the same time. He's going to get into some way more in-depth data. I do want to do a quick snapshot on the market overview. This gives you an idea of how many new listings to sales are actually happening. And I checked the data for you guys today before I came here, and there was pretty much twice as many new listings as sales that were happening. There was, I think, 750 new listings, and you're probably hedging just around 300 in terms of sales, which should give you an idea on where the trend line is going. I can tell you from a buyer's perspective, and I think about this when we reverse engineer the sales side, the buyers are overwhelmed by what's online. They don't even know. And I think the job of an agent's changed over the years, where an agent back in the day was the person you called who had the book of listings. You had to call them because there was no listings online. Then listings went online, but you didn't have sold data. Then House Sigma came out and everybody could use House Sigma. So now you have the sold data. And I think the conversation we're talking about is like, okay, if there's so many listings online and I'm a seller or I'm a buyer, the role of an agent has now become not telling you what your neighbor's house sold for or what that development sold for or land is worth. It's why is it worth that, right? It's the interpretation of the data that's drastically changing in our career. Would you agree with that sentiment?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so much. I'll go into a little bit more scripted when I have the full mic here, and I'm going to kind of make fun of some of the information that's out there. But there is so much data out there nowadays that I think the agents that have experience know how to interpret that data, and as I said earlier, help guide their clients to make the decision. So I think a lot of what I'll chat about shortly is very applicable to those agents in the room. And if you're investors, I'd be looking at that data to look at trends or opportunities. And I think that's what we all should do as investors.
Yeah, I agree. I also think like going back and looking at the asset classes and the territories and the price points, things have really changed quicker in the last couple years in terms of like peaks of activity and drop-offs than I've seen ever before. Where like all of a sudden in the last probably 2 weeks, we've noticed a drastic drop-off in terms of showing activity, sales to a certain degree. And I think we're seeing a bit of a culling of old inventory, people getting very realistic on their selling price or just trying to find the market. And then buyers that are coming, we're also analyzing the data, are very high intention. So like the number of leads that are coming in are 15 times what they were previously to get to the 20 people who may be looking to get to the 3 qualified virtual appointments to get the showing and actually find the buyer, right? Does it change in Hamilton for you guys for that capacity?
Yeah, I'm going to show some of that data. I've really tailored my talk to, I didn't know what the environment is going to look like. So I'm going to put a bunch of visuals up for you guys. Again, for those of you that are practicing, I think your mind should go to, this is the type of interpretation or data that I'm looking at. But, there are markets within the market. So I think Just is talking about that point. I'm asked the question, every day, how's the market? I wish people were asking, how's the realtor? We're struggling right now, and the markets are different, whether they're commercial, residential, condominium. Even within Hamilton, there are markets within the market. So I think it's really key, and I hope to take away from certainly my segment is interpreting some of that data.
So I put a quick rundown. Current state, when people ask me, it's definitely a buyer's market when you look at the amount of inventory and sales. You see a lot of realtor uncertainty, which is terrifying. If you're trusting these people with your biggest asset, you have to make sure they know what they're doing. Longer days on market, sellers are sometimes lost with what to do. Not all realtors are created equal, nor are sellers, nor are investors, nor are buyers, right? That's just a real gut check for people. Now, the good people that I know that are out there, they're searching for answers. They're studying the market. They're trying to talk to other people and see what they're doing that's working. And it has changed dramatically. I was in a builder's office this afternoon, and we're about to launch another phase of a condo project. And we were talking about, like, do we wait? Like, this isn't a recreational market, and I could definitely see the weather having a huge impact on it. I'm like, why don't we wait till June 1st? Like, we have a list of 900 people that registered and have been involved in the first couple phases. Why don't we just hop on the phones and start talking to people, engaging the sentiment, and just like, also, what can you give me to give them that you won't do once we're publicly launched? They gave me a bunch of incentives that, like, he's gonna take a little bit of a hit on the first 4 to 8 that he's going to do, but he's like, listen, I want the right people. He's like, here's like a 3-tier incentive you can offer them. Get on the phones with them. If they're legit buyers that, you know, are going to sell or buy within a certain time frame, I'm okay to take a little bit of a loss on the first ones, but understanding that even his pricing strategy, and this is something to think about when you're picking your builders, they're going to fight for their own product. Because if you bought with them during the peak and they've had to adjust, that's just the reality of the marketplace. They're not trying to do anything wrong to you. That's just they have to find the market. But you're also noticing other ones that are smart that are scrapping it out for you, right? And that's why I say I could add builders to the list. I could add mortgage brokers. Like, you can't paint an entire profession or group of people with one brush. You really have to get into the minutia of how are they navigating the problems that they are facing today. Sirhan taught me something incredible once, and he said, always zoom out and understand what is happening from a macro level, but then zoom into the actual problem and get forensic with it. And I think that's what we're going to do tonight with a few of the speakers into how they're adapting and finding innovative solution in the investing space and modular storage. And yeah, it's why I like hosting these events. So in terms of seller sentiments, a lot of sellers are still chasing a spring market that has not happened this year. It doesn't seem to exist. They made some people on the seller side, they've already made a purchase and then they're going out and trying to rush selling their house. I can tell you from a strategic perspective, a lot of times we're telling people just put your house on the market, like start shopping the second it's actually on the market. Because also I'm not going to do an offer for you unless you can definitely carry 2 houses until your house is sold. Because on the opposite side, what we're seeing is a lot of sellers want top dollar for their house and they want a screaming deal on the buy side. I'm like, well, it's kind of a wash because you may find a deal on the buy side and we'll try and crush that for you, but you're probably going to get the same type of buyer trying to shop for your property. So getting a lot more realistic, we're seeing some people find a lot more success. On the buyer sentiment side, they're almost a little too cocky. I think there's a bit of a balancing act that their agents need to be a little bit more educational in terms of that it's 97 to 98% of list prices where the majority of properties are actually selling. Sure, you can lowball, but you need to be reasonable about where the offer is actually going to end up. I'll dig into it in a few slides as well too. From a realtor sentiment, again, understand what you're dealing with. A lot of them are panicked about paying their bills in the market. I think you're going to see, I called 30 to 40% drop off of agents from peak 2022. We lost 34% the last time that I checked in North America. A lot of them got licensed because they saw selling sunset and thought the job was easy. The only ones that are actually lasting are the ones that actually treat it like a profession or are very niche at what they do. And also the ones that I'm finding, like Mike, that are finding success, I'm trying to study what they're doing that's actually making a difference. They are refocused on how to adapt and shift to how the buyer and seller conversations are happening and changing their business models at warp speed, figuring out how to do more with less, getting really good with technology and AI because it is here. But from a compliance perspective, do you all know that if your agents are using ChatGPT and dropping your contracts in there and they haven't turned off share publicly in their settings, they're going to be ripe for a lawsuit. A lot of people don't realize if you're putting stuff into ChatGPT, you need to make sure that that setting is turned off in your settings. Little thing that could really be a big thing if you're not aware of that. Over-indexing on value, they're data-driven and collaborating to access info, data, and deals. One little super hack that we do is agent-to-agent conversations. Like I will call my competition who has a house listed on the exact same street as me, and I'll give him an olive branch to get information from him. Like, hey, it's been dead. Are you getting anything? And that gives them the space to turn around and be like, oh, no, I'm not. Versus if I'm like, hey, are you getting activity? And he'd be like, oh yeah, we're killing it. We're doing so great. Like the egos get involved and you see that back and forth. I bet you, even you, Paul, like on the builder side, working with builders that you trust, when you have those real conversations, that data, then you can take back to your organization and execute and your clients, right? So that's been a really big part of it. He's gotten more phone calls from me than he probably wanted over the years. Pre-negotiating to a high level perspective, our negotiating these days is way different than it's been definitely during the peak. During the peak, it was, you had to get the deal done quickly. You had to be responsive. You didn't have time to do the work that we're doing now. Today, we're actually brokering more deals than you could ever imagine, which is actually picking up the phone and having conversations with people. I have one agent, I called him this morning and I literally laid it up for him on a silver platter and he can't just seem to pick up the phone and get the deal done. I got him on the phone this morning and I'm pretty sure we're gonna get an offer tonight, but you literally have to go that extra mile, pick up the phone. The way I encourage agents to do it, take 5 agents in your market, call them daily, give them an olive branch, build the bridge, share something with them, and then ask them what they're working on. And a lot of times how you can help them. And then if you do have a client file that happens to be in their niche, like Patricia, I know the types of houses you sell. Then if I'm like, hey, we're selling the Chef's Estate, you should come see it, and you come, then it's a little bit of a different engagement than if you're just cold calling people you've never actually built a relationship with. So go ahead.
Yeah, I'd love to share on that. Given the room is half realtors, did you know that you could do a seller's offer to a buyer? And we just had great success. It was a tactic I used in 2008. But we have a property that was kind of stale, not getting a lot of activity, motivated sellers, and we had 2 buyers that cooled off. They were thinking about it, and they decided to cool off. So by the time the 3rd buyer came, I presented to the seller, they're interested, let's make them an offer. And of course, the client didn't realize you could do that. It started the negotiation. So rather than baking a price reduction, we offered 10,000 less than asking, just to get the negotiations going. And we just firmed up this morning, and the agent called me and goes, that whole deal was because of you. So being aggressive sometimes when you need to, or using tools that are in our kit, is really what a lot of this is about, networking and understanding strategies.
You got to be an ethical shark these days. You can be a shark and a nice shark that plays with other fish and other sharks. But you have to actually be proactive. If you're waiting for the market to come to you, I promise you, it will not. And in some instances, you have to be able to have honest conversations with your clients about that. If the market's not there, there's nothing you can do to fabricate an offer unless you buy the property yourself, right? And eventually, with the lowest price, everything will sell. So really, then you have a conversation with your clients honestly about that. The other thing I was going to say, another little insight for you guys is what Mike is saying is absolutely true. Like on the offer process side of things, I can't tell you the amount of times an agent sends me an offer, it expires at 10 o'clock at night. And I tell them, hey, we're not going to deal with the offer. We'll have a conversation in the morning. I'll send you a sign back. Just because that offer died doesn't mean that we can't modify that offer and send it back as a seller counter to them. Like the education level in our industry really does need to change because this is a core concept that when you change anything in an offer, an irrevocability date, a price, a deposit, it then becomes a new offer from the seller back to the buyer. Right? And therein lies a great opportunity for people to really do things a little bit differently than they're used to. Components of an offer you can really play with, I think. To find a deal, getting creative now is one of the biggest opportunities for people. Everybody focuses on price, but like, what is the story of the person buying the property? Do they have a house to sell? Do they have that house ready to sell? Who is selling that house? When do they need to close? Do they need it furnished? There's so many other things that come into play into an offer that rather than just price, that you can, again, build a bridge and create a win-win scenario, but not if you're not willing to actually be strategic and do the work. So I'm not going to stick on that for too long. And then getting deals to the finish line. And also the surgeon here, resuscitating dead deals. Like, you have to work for the deal. You have to go the extra mile to make sure. We're dealing with one right now where they asked for another month extension on a contract. And I was like, I know my seller's response is probably going to be no out of the gate. I also know we're crushing your form on the sale, and he trusts me enough that if I'm like, let's give them the time they need, I don't know if we're going to see this price again, he'll trust me. But at the same time, asking for another 50 or 100K non-refundable deposit to make sure that the buyer's absolutely serious, so that if we do have to go back to market, we can make that slight adjustment, right? Like, how many deals have you done that other agents would have just assumed were dead deals that you were able to get to the finish line?
Yeah, we're closer to the GTA. And there's a stat that came out within the last couple of weeks. This year, 75% of the 70,000 realtors have not done a transaction yet this year. So like, when you're not doing it once in 6 months, I suspect you haven't mastered that craft. So, you've got to be proactive. You've got to, resuscitate the deal. And sometimes you got to do the work for the other broker, which is brilliant. Your client has hired you to represent their interests. Love when I got an opportunity to do the other agent's job. I'll get what I want.
Yeah, actually, that's a big point. I know Amanda Taylor, a lot of the agents at Prime over the years, I've seen them do this, where when we present offers, we've been taught that you structure the actual email. So when you're on the conversation with the person, you can literally hit send by the time you're done the conversation with the other agent, so that nothing gets mistranslated. Because I can't tell you the amount of leads that have called us on properties. And he's like, I got to talk to my wife. And I'm like, oh, dear God, please let me get on the phone with you and your wife, because you're not going to remember half of what I said. A, because I talk really fast, but B, because you don't do this every day. Imagine that times 10 with other real estate agents. Like what he's talking about, like we deal with those agents all the time. And we end up doing both sides of the transaction because it is in the best interest of our seller. Not when I say both sides, we end up doing their job for them. We let them get paid. We don't garnish their commissions. We don't anyways. But it takes a lot more proactive awareness to realize when that's actually happening and what's going to happen on the back end of that deal. And there, I can't tell you the amount of deals that have died that you ended up going back to that they're there, right?
You know, I'll give another nugget we've had success with, getting creative. You know, I've done this now for 2 decades. You can see the gray in my beard. Where we used to present an offer as a buyer's agent in front of the seller. We've lost that privilege, and I think it was a privilege when we got to do that. So we started doing Loom recordings of presenting our offer. So giving it to the agent to do the tough work, where the listing agent, you know, maybe doesn't convey your message properly. And again, the feedback we get back on that is like a pat on the back. The deal got done because I was able to articulate, you know, our position, and I didn't rely on maybe an agent only doing it a couple of times a year.
You have to be tactical too with how you write it because you're writing it to the seller or the client, right? The agent's the conduit, but that's all we are. We're not the most important people in the transaction, although social media, some agents think they are. The properties and the clients are actually the most important part. We're there, Luke Skywalker, we're Yoda. We're guiding the journey, but they're the actual hero. And I think what he said is absolutely bang on. And that's where just making sure that you're doing things the way that they're supposed to be done and you're prepared is the difference between the majority of the marketplace and people who are stuck in paralysis by analysis with what they're reading in the news, they're seeing from a stats perspective. It's not reflective of what's actually happening because the market isn't paralyzed. There were still in the last 7 days, 300 transactions that happened, right? That's the reality of it. Sure, there was 700 plus listings that went live, but what does that mean? It means 300 people a week times 4 weeks. That's about 1,200 people a month who are actively purchasing in the region that we happen to cover. So then it's about getting in, again, zoom out, zoom in, and make sure that you're deploying your energy against the right people. And I think one thing that we've gotten super, and I'm going to go down a wormhole here. Even from our business perspective, there's a lot of people in this room who run businesses. Independent contractors, full-blown companies, people that run large development corporations, everything in between, and people who want to run businesses one day. I have watched over the last 5 years, people during the bull run work really hard, and then after things stop, do one of two things. Blame everything else and complain, or get really lean and mean and do more with less, and reevaluate the vision of their company, us included, Prime included. Technology has given us the ability to probably do 20 times as much with half the team size that we've had. The team would attest to this, that I probably drilled into their head nonstop this year, that the vision of Prime has changed drastically in the last 12 months. We're not a brokerage, we're a company that specializes in buying, selling real estate. We work with people that adhere to our vision, use our resources, and hit our standard. There's a lot of OG Prime agents that have built the airplane with me while we've been flying it, and they're going through a readjustment phase right now. But the right people are showing up in a way that you couldn't imagine. But it's because we took the time to kind of set that vision and that intention. And we've had to lose some people along the way, client-wise, agent-wise, and it hurts. But pain is a sign of growth. And it's actually proven to me that we're actually on the right path. And I think a lot of people that are in the real estate adjacent space, corporate space, are all doing the same thing. And if you're spending time to be here, you're probably doing that to some capacity because information's power. I'm going to shut up now, and I'm going to let him talk about the data side, right? Talked a little bit about the art side, the market, how we're actually navigating it.
So I'm going to throw it out there because I'm going to start with this. The investors that are in the room, how many of you made an acquisition in the last 12 months? Hands up. Wow, that's awesome. 6 months? You can keep those hands up. What about the last 3 months? You know, a couple. I think as I get into, yeah, that's perfect, Justin. I didn't know that the environment I was coming into here. So usually when I talk, I like to just be really driven or led by a slide deck. So bear with me as I kind of navigate. And I'm calling this period as we're halfway through 25, the confidence gap. because the fundamentals in the market, in the Canadian market, are actually very strong. And I'm going to take us 30,000 feet up. And I usually start, when I start this market update, I start with a cute story. During COVID, I took my daughters out to go get ice cream. And as we were driving to get ice cream, my youngest, who you see in a photo here, asked me, hey, Dad, what's that symbol on the dashboard mean? And it's probably like your vehicles are similar to mine. There's hundreds of symbols. So I said to her, which symbol are you talking about, dear? And she pointed to the one with the man flying through the air trying to bonk his head. And I'll never look at a USB charging signal again the same way, and I hope you guys do as well. And I realized, man, it's confusing. Look at all these symbols, look at all these signs, and our market is no different. So I also, at this time, when I'm giving a market update, I'll have you flip through there, Justin. I pulled 3 articles in the last few days. I started wearing glasses, so some of you might have to help me read the dates on that. I think the first one was on the 15th, and the headline there is that the Canadian real estate market is entering a transition period. Well, 3 days later, thanks, Justin, we have another article that says home sales are down 10% annually last month, according to the Canadian Real Estate Association. And 3 days later, we see the Globe and Mail report, 8 smoking hot housing markets in Canada. And you'll see this every time I do this. Some of you have been in my updates. I can pull this any month, any year, and find equally confusing headlines. So I'm here to kind of set some of the facts straight. And I'm going to start by just going, for those of us that are selling, have noticed prices have come down over the last couple of years, really from 2022, due to, some government fiscal policy. Interest rate was the big one. But if you look at some of the fundamentals, first of all, this softening in pricing has allowed more buyers to get into the market, while the fundamentals remain very, very strong. We see stable prices, we see lower borrowing costs, higher household savings, higher employment, and we're about to go through a massive intergenerational transfer of wealth. All of those baby boomers out there are going to start to pass some of their money on to those of us that have been anxiously and patiently waiting. So I think you've got to address tariffs. You can't talk about what's going on in our economy. So I'm going 30,000 feet up. I'm not going to talk about the Hamilton market, or I don't know anything about the London market. I'm going to talk about nationally what we're seeing and what should drive some of our housing future. And I don't think we can talk about what's going on without addressing tariffs. And for those of us, most of us are aware, tariffs are just a tax on consumers. And the intention of implementing the tariffs may have a good long-term effect on production, but the early onset effect of tariffs are inflation. And we've just recently got inflation under control back into, the Bank of Canada's target rate, 2.5%. With the way the tariffs are being imposed in the US, there are forecasts that this may not have the same impact on inflation in Canada as what we're expecting within the US. And under Trump's tariffs, the forecast within our local economy, Canadian economy, is we're going to see a slowdown in gross GDP, but we're still going to see growth in GDP, which is really interesting because, as I started by calling this the confidence gap, there is a massive, massive wave of lack of confidence that is shaken throughout almost all markets. I'm going to report on some Toronto board stats. I am a Toronto board member, but we practice in Hamilton.
We're also on the Toronto board. Boards are very confusing for people. It's a pipeline of data, and there's different, like Sarnia doesn't talk to Toronto. They're all kind of independent of each other, but Toronto's the largest board, primary, secondary, tertiary markets, a really good snapshot of kind of everything.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's worth looking at the major markets because as Hamilton's a secondary market, and London would be a secondary, tertiary market. But we've seen really a decline in sales volume. So prices have settled down. February, we saw a 10%, actually was the lowest sales volume we saw in a decade, followed by March, which had the lowest sales volume in 23 years. Like, that's incredible. I've been doing this for 2 decades, and we've seen the lowest trading volume. We've seen our markets really nationally come to almost a halt. And we still have this housing shortage across the country. But one of the interesting changes in government policy is going to be on population growth. So the number of newcomers that come into the country, as well as the number of foreign students, is going to be paused, and that's starting to have a little bit of impact on this less trading volume.
There's also the foreign buyer ban that's still in place, right? Where people are trying to come here and buy properties and they can. I don't know if they're going to talk about lifting that soon, but I've heard some murmurings about, well, it clearly did make houses more affordable. How much of impact is it actually having, right?
Yeah, I think it had something like 4%. There's very, very little impact. I should have prefaced this by going like, I'm just going to throw like a rapid fire. Charts and graphs, usually people start to glaze over and you guys are almost there already. So I'll fire kind of through some of this, but we're seeing businesses be a little bit more cautious. Small business owners, outside of realtors, we're small business owners, but how many small business owners in? So, shake your head or not if you're in agreement. You're cautious on spending, maybe cautious on hiring, some hiring freezes in place. Is that a fair assessment of what was happening out here? So that's really kind of the economic front. There's a lot of caution in place. Historically, the good news is we as Canadians are typically very calm. We handle crises very well, and we stay calm and we carry on during these crises. We did so during COVID, and we look to be handling this trade war crises very well early on.
Even Leafs games, right? They handle that crisis okay.
Yeah, I'm not going to comment on that. That was a downer.
I'm a Habs fan, originally from Montreal, so I'm sorry.
As we look at, we've got the lowest debt to GDP ratio in the G7. The Bank of Canada is really well established and credible, has a lot of credibility both nationally and internationally. And as we look at global debt ratings and growing debt trade, Canada seems to be in a good position. I'll bring attention to this next slide because I found this pretty interesting. As we look at GDP growth really coming out of COVID, prior to this trade war, we saw consistent growth over the last 4 or 5 years. And I spoke earlier about how we're anticipating moderate growth in GDP even through these trade wars. And there's been some good news in terms of the key lending rate, where we've brought the key lending rate down to 2.75%, forecasted to be about 2.25% as we get through the summer. So again, this is just rapid fire. Unemployment remains low, while employment remains high as we look at some of February's data. And Canadians are actually wealthier than they've been any year prior to 2024. So they hit a new record of wealth at $17.5 trillion in 2024. Our savings, this is some of the data that economists will look at in terms of predicting where markets may go. We still save at a very high rate, as high as we were back through 2022, 2023. And we're about to add $1 trillion worth of wealth transfer into the marketplace over the next couple of years. So when you look at some of those fundamentals, actually there's one more I'll talk about that I think is pretty interesting. We're dealing with some mortgage defaults. But when you look at Canadian default rates and you compare them to the US, although we've seen default rates increase, we're at about 17 defaults per 10,000 mortgages. We're up to 22 defaults per 10,000 mortgages. This is a fraction of 1/20th of the default rate that we see to our southern border. So Canadians are typically very diligent on making their mortgage payments.
Our banks are very different too, right? Like we've dealt with a lot of power of sales over the last year, but the process is completely different because they protect the borrowers. You have to market the property for as much as you could possibly get before they actually distribute the funds. And again, the banks don't even really want them. Like we dealt with a lot of A and B lenders where the banks are like, we know what the market's like. We'd rather you just sell it for as much money as possible. And they're reasonable with Canadians to extend, as long as they see that seller is trying to make some effort to actually be compliant on the mortgage side of things. And they'll work out deals, going back to what we said earlier, being creative and communicative. I've never seen anybody get fired for over communicating, but I've seen a lot of people get fired for just not picking up the phone. Same goes for defaults, right?
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. So I'm going to just kind of circle back and go, some of the fundamentals hold really, really strong in terms of that stable prices, borrowing costs are down, household savings are up, employment and higher incomes are up. So the fundamentals are holding quite strong in our marketplace. And I'm going to give a nugget to those of you that are trading realtors. I think this next part is gold. I'd encourage you to take a photo of it because this is this is one of the leading indicators that really give you a crystal ball as to what's going to happen in the marketplace. I usually present it as such. In order for us to get a house sold, we've got to generate offers. And in order for us to generate offers, we've got to generate showings. One of the neatest things that came out of COVID was data. For a guy like me, I love it. Prior to COVID, we weren't tracking the number of buyer showings that took place. So I was always asked the question, I know what supply looks like. There's 2,000 listings on the market, but how much buyer demand is out there? And we had no idea. We couldn't track the number of buyers that were booking showings, and we now have that data accessible to us. So as a realtor, as a practitioner, look at that data. As an investor, I'm going to tell the story of what's going on and how to interpret this data. So what you're looking at on this graph is supply and demand simply. Blue indicates the number of showings in the marketplace, and orange indicates the number of new listings hitting the market, supply and demand. And on the far left side of that screen, this was the post-COVID era, 2021 into 2022. And in our marketplace, we saw about 10,000 showings taking place per week in that spring. The following spring, we dropped to about 8,500 showings. And then something really interesting happened. Those graphs inverted. Orange, we started to see inventory increase, and we started to see demand decline. And it was at this time, because we were watching this data, we could guide clients that there was a shift taking place in the market. Remember that sales process. It starts with showings. If there's not a lot of showings, you're not going to get a lot of offers, and you're not going to get a lot of solds. So we track this data, we extrapolate it, and we look at it weekly as a team. And you see some interesting trends in there, like the bottom of each of one of those. I can tell you that's December, Christmas holidays. We see about 1,800 showings in our market, followed by a rapid pickup in buyer demand, if you look at the blue. And what is also interesting when you're talking to clients, you can illustrate our spring market isn't April, May, June. Our spring market in Hamilton is actually February, March. So this year we're very fortunate. Actually, we used this data to get some of our clients onto the market when there wasn't a lot of listings, and they did very well. I had some of those, leading indicators help guide. So I think this is gold, and I truly think that if you're a practitioner, start to look into this stuff, because there's immense value that you can deliver your clients in terms of forecasting maybe where the market's going. And if you're an investor, this is the stuff that I would want to look at. Where's the market headed? Well, let's look at one of the leading indicators. So I think I've glazed you. Two other points. We're seeing the highest showing demand that we've seen in the last 22 months. So the buyer demand, although we're sitting in a relatively flat market, is more demand in Hamilton than we've seen in the last 2 years. And here's the other piece of that story is, yeah, you can go ahead, Justin. We're seeing more listing inventory than we've seen in the last 3 years. And I'm not looking at, we've got another graph I use sometimes, cumulative listing inventory. Like this is new listings hitting the market each month. The wider that delta between those two graphs can really indicate what type of market you might be in. So back to that question, how's the market? Really the question should be, what type of market are we in? Are we in a balanced market? Are we in a buyer's market? Or are we in a seller's market? And this data can be used to show what type of market we're heading into. So on that, I'm going to finish with one more slide deck. For those of you that I haven't come across, we do something very similar to Justin. I want to lead with as much value as I can. One of the most valuable things we put out is every week we assess the best investment properties in Hamilton, Brantford, and St. Catharines. If you're not subscribed to our deal of the week, there's tons of value in it. You've seen it for years. We present the deals on a silver platter, and I've become known nationally for being so consistent with this. Like we don't miss a week. I see Mike nodding his head as well. So if you haven't subscribed to that, if you're an investor, great. If you're a realtor, borrow it, copy it, implement it into your marketing strategy. So I'm going to leave on that note. Thanks for all your attention.
Awesome. Appreciate it, Mike. Thank you.